channel once. It's Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. The Stairway to Enlightenment by David R. Hawkins, MD, PhD. We have a couple different emotions that we could dive into, like apathy, courage, pride, desire, fear, anger, reason, acceptance. Today, I've decided to speak on fear. Page 107. Sorry if the lighting's not the best, but here we go. And also thank you for tuning into the channel. I appreciate it. Chapter 5, Fear, Calibration Level 100. Introduction. At the level of 100, more life energy is available. Fear of danger runs much of the world, spurring on endless activity. Fear of enemies, old age, or death and rejection, along with a multitude of social fears, is a basic motivator in the lives of most people. From the viewpoint on this level, the world appears hazardous, filled with traps and threats. Fear is the favorite official tool for control by oppressive totalitarian agencies. The proliferation of fears is as limitless as the human imagination. Terrifying. Once one focuses on fear, the endless fearful events of the world feed it. Fear becomes obsessive and may take any form. For example, fear of the loss of a relationship leads to jealousy and a chronically high stress level. Fearful thinking can balloon into paranoia or generate neurotic defensive structures. And because it is contagious, it can become a dominant social trend. Fear limits growth of the personality and leads to inhibition. Because it takes energy to rise above fear, the oppressed are unable to reach a higher level without assistance. Thus, the fearful seek strong leaders who appear to have conquered their fear to lead them out of its slavery. Fear is an emotion, but as a pervasive lifestyle, it is limiting. Realistic fear, i.e. caution, subserves survival in contrast to irrational fears, which indicate psychological intrapsychic problems. Socially serviceable fear is an accepted and normal concomitant to all human life. Its pervasiveness is expressed in almost every area of life, from locked doors and fire alarms to health and eating habits and the whole financial structure of society. In addition, it is a recurrent focus of the media, where it plays a major role in human affairs, especially survival. From an evolutionary viewpoint, fear arose as a requisite of animal survival, which in the human progressed through capacity for cognition into expressions that have meaning, including expression as abstractions. The capacity to analyze and abstract the perception of time and its concept of the future provides an endless variety of real or imaginary conditions along which fear can be projected. Thus, the multiplicity of fears promulgates endlessly via the mechanism of imagination and fantasy, whereas guilt, shame, and regret represent the past. Fear is an anticipation that is focused on the future. It's important. Fear is an anticipation that is focused on the future. How many times have maybe you've been afraid of future outcomes, but then those outcomes never happened, as opposed to how many times those did happen? I'm sure if you weighed those out, life usually gives you the benefit of the doubt, or benefit of the fear. Because the basic mechanism of fear is of animal origin and a prerequisite to survival. It is built into the very structure and physiology of the human brain. Fear also eventuates into the fear of the emotional and physiological symptoms of fear itself. These can result in adaptive skills, but when out of control, they can escalate to dread, terror, and paralyzing panic. Although fear adds safeguards that are woven into all aspects of ordinary life, its operational fluctuations are accepted as normal. Fear as a prevailing mode of behavior is uncomfortable and a hindrance that limits reality testing, resulting in a decrease in the level of consciousness. As a predominant level of consciousness at calibration level 100, fear becomes a limitation and a habitual prevailing subjective state of expectancy, which can then be projected onto almost any aspect of life. This results in hyperarousal of the brain's survival mechanisms, which results in a higher alert level of the diffuse reticular activating system that triggers release of stress hormones expressed at the adrenaline cortisone balance, along with the other neurotransmitters. Fears that are related to protective countermeasures support survival. Unrealistic fears, however, can become incapacitating. From an evolutionary viewpoint, it can be seen that human life starts with the infants already experiencing fear being dropped or the loss of a maternal figure. Fear continues on throughout life and ends with the fear of death itself, along with the fear of the unknown. In normal life, fear is assuaged by myriad defense maneuvers and compensations that make life tolerable or even pleasant, yet lurking in the shadows are fears that are inexplicable, including those of accidental or catastrophic events. Research literature indicates that religious spiritual alignment with faith is capable of reducing overall levels of fear. The spiritual energy shifts brain dominance to a more benign system processing by which stress hormones are replaced by endorphins and levels of serotonin and other neurotransmitters. Transcending fear. The processing out of negative feelings is similar to the start of recovery from other negative attitudes and states. In this process, fears are allowed to arise without resistance, and their emotional energy is surrendered as it arises. A simple technique is called "and then what?" In this process, one starts with a fearfulness and then surrenders to a consequence if such a fear should actually happen. For example, I'm afraid I'll lose my job, and then what? Then I won't have any money, and then what? And then we'll be thrown out of the house, and then what? And then we'll become homeless, and then what? And then we won't have any money for food, and we could starve to death, and then what? And then we'll get sick and die, and so on. As each fear consequence is surrendered, it can be for multitudes do that very thing. The train of fears always terminates and ends up with the fear of physical death itself. Interestingly so, the near-death experience subsequently eliminates all fear of death, also experientially true in the author's own life. Almost all social, psychological, and physical fears are unconsciously just elaborations of the fear of death, from which they all arise. It may take only a short time, or it could take hours, days, or even longer to go through the whole list of horrors. Finally, when death is accepted and surrendered to God, or whoever you believe in, or whatever you believe in, or the absence of God, the core of the fears drops away. This final curative surrender obviously brings up one's contextualization of divinity and surrendering physical life to God or higher power, then brings up the last stack of fears, which relate to destiny. Destiny. Fears of a punitive God and anthropomorphic depictions and legends of divinity. It is helpful to remember that if God or your higher power were not all merciful, we probably would not even be alive today. Even primitive belief systems of punitive, jealous, vengeful, and angry gods also provide resolutions by which redemption and salvation can be granted. Within rational and comfortable realms, these include absolution by confession, penance, acceptance of a savior, institution of a major change of behavior, prayer, entreaty, and basically surrendering one's will to God. Looks like I had some notes here. Finally, there can be an addiction to the excitement of fear and the concomitant imaginary melodrama. Resolve, conclude, determine the answer. Why am I afraid? What am I afraid of? How many times has that fear actually affected me? How will I solve my fear? One therapeutic modality is to teach the sufferer self-hypnosis, which is a relatively simple technique that can be readily learned in one session. Self-hypnosis is also a tool for past life regression and recall. Skepticism remains until the actual past life experience begins to rerun itself, enabling the core issues to become apparent, thus bringing great relief. Fears can be converted to rational predictions and calculations that result in the preservation of life without resort to the emotionality of fear itself. Finally, there can be an addiction to the excitement of fear and the concomitant imaginary melodrama. Consciousness research confirms that death is not a possibility. Life itself is supported by its eternal source from which it cannot be separated. That which is linear, circumscribed, and limited in time comes into existence because of that which is eternal and nonlinear. The dualities of fear. Fear is a basic survival mechanism and intrinsic to the evolution of the ego. From the earliest primitive animal life forms, there is short-term realistic fear that is in contrast to fear as a prevailing dominant level of consciousness. Fears have an early onset in the young child and proliferate throughout life, unless countered by an overall feeling of security. Fear, security. The choice is yours. Fears. To feel adequate in response to life requires surmounting the irrational fears that emerge as a result of the ego's numerous positionalities. I know we sort of skipped around there in that chapter, but I hope that you've gotten a little bit of information and education from it. What are you afraid of? What are you not pursuing? What's holding you back? Are you not working hard enough? Are you working too hard? Are you not relaxing enough? Are you relaxing too much? I know in the ASMR community you can never relax too much, but sometimes there are moments in life where you need to kick it into high gear. But even if you do kick it into high gear, you have to make sure you balance that out with some low gears. Thank you everyone for tuning into my channel once again. This is Millennial.